Hi, and welcome to another LRCC Soundbite. Who do you know that always has to have the last word? I'm sure we all know someone like that. Whatever's happening, whatever's being discussed, they always have to have the last say. Sometimes they just have to say something, regardless of whether it's relevant or helpful. Those last words are often the things that stick with you afterwards. Sometimes last words can be important. I was reading a few last words from the Bible this week, all very different and all very important. I started off with King David, Jewish king. He lived around 3,000 years ago. David is a really important character in the Bible. This is the same David from the story of David and Goliath, but he wasn't just a giant killer and he wasn't just a king. He was also an accomplished songwriter and musician. Now, people look back on his reign as king and remember it as one of the real high spots of the Israelite nation. And in his last recorded words before he died, he talks about God as being his rock, a solid foundation for him, and that he would listen to what God said and follow it. He speaks of a God who never breaks his promises to him, and that God's promises are always complete. They don't change. They don't have loopholes. He says that God has and will always help him. David's final words were quite poetic in nature and quite encouraging. The next set of last words I looked at were quite different. It's about 1,000 years later, and Jesus is stood in front of the Roman governor of Israel, a man called Pilate. Now, Pilate's biggest concern was to try and keep the land peaceful and not cause trouble for Rome. He had to balance the religious leaders against the Israelite people, knowing all the time that Rome was an occupying force in the land, and there were many people who wanted to fight against them and kick them out. Jerusalem was particularly busy this day, as the Jewish festival of Passover was going on, and the religious leaders, had brought a man to him and asked him to get this man executed for treason. The trouble was, Pilate couldn't figure out what this man had done. The only thing he could find was that he'd annoyed the religious leaders. So, as Pilate was questioning Jesus, the question of whether Jesus was a king came up. After all, the religious leaders had told Pilate that Jesus was trying to set himself up against Rome, and that was their argument about why he should be executed. Now, Jesus answered Pilate's questions in a way that you could read as quite cryptic. He told Pilate that his kingdom didn't belong to this world, and that if it did, then his followers would have already been fighting for him. Rather, he told Pilate that he was in this world to tell the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, somehow I think those words must have stuck with Pilate, because eventually when Jesus was executed, Pilate had a sign attached saying that Jesus was the King of the Jews. Something about this conversation really did stick. Right at the end of the Bible are some more last words, written several decades later as a result of a vision that one of Jesus' friends was going to have. In this vision, Jesus, who had gone back to heaven probably 30 odd years previously, appeared and gave messages to be delivered to 7 of the churches around Asia. And we still have the words of those messages today. There's encouragement in them of where they're doing really well. There's words of warning saying things like, you used to do this really well, but be careful, you're starting to not be so great at this. These are the last recorded words in the Bible of Jesus directly, and we still find them useful today. After all, when you look at the world today, you do have to ask yourself how much has really changed in the way that people are and their attitudes to each other. Last words can be really important, and you never know when the words you say to someone might be particularly significant. Life can be unpredictable. So I guess my encouragement to myself and to you this week is to think about how we can always make our words positive and encouraging. After all, I would much prefer the last words that someone remembers that I've said to be positive and not bringing them down. So with that, can I wish you a peaceful and a blessed week? God bless you, and I'll see you next time.